"You're such a disappointment, Sarah." My mother's voice was feather light, as smooth as expensive silk. But inside that silk hid 1,000 poisoned needles. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle on my sister Chloe's designer dress, then turned to look at my military dress uniform as if she'd just stepped on a stain on a priceless Persian rug. "I told you to change into a decent dress, Sarah," she sighed. The exact kind of sigh belonging to a woman who always considered herself the world's greatest victim. "Today is your sister's engagement party, an elegant gathering, not one of your sweaty military barracks. Look at you, so rigid, so rough, not a single drop of femininity." Richard, Chloe's fiancé, a hedge fund manager who was always a bit too slick, reeking of Tom Ford cologne, smirked from across the banquet table. He swirled his red wine and spoke with a condescending drawl. "Let her wear it, Eleanor. She probably thinks those cheap metal medals will land her a better husband than a 7-figure bank account." Chloe covered her mouth and giggled, leaning her head on Richard's shoulder. A flawless family portrait. A perfect theatrical performance. It was November 2021. I was standing in the middle of my family's crystal-lit living room. On my left breast, right over my heart, sat a purple heart. I had traded a piece of shrapnel lodged near my lung for it on the outskirts of Damascus, Syria, on a night when the temperature dropped below freezing and the smell of blood mixed with gunpowder. I had just finished a 14-month intelligence deployment at a forward operating base. I had stayed awake for 72 straight hours to decrypt a weapons smuggling ring, watching my comrades fall. My mind was still echoing with the sound of air raid sirens. And yet, standing in that room full of expensive perfume and fake smiles, I suddenly realized the most brutal war of my life wasn't in the Middle East. The most brutal war was the one happening with the people I was supposed to call family. My mother never screamed. Don't get me wrong. Manipulative mothers, true narcissists, never use their fists or loud curses. That's for amateurs. My mother's weapon was far more sophisticated. She attacked using guilt. She knew exactly how to hollow out your self-esteem, twist herself into a symbol of ultimate sacrifice, and make you believe that the very act of your breathing was a burden, an insult to her existence. She didn't hate me. No, that would be too simple. She hated that she couldn't control me. The military represented absolute independence. It taught me boundaries. It taught me discipline. And a manipulator can never stand it when their prey has boundaries. So, she had to constantly humiliate my career, step on my trauma, just to drag me back under her thumb. How am I supposed to explain this to the senator and his wife? My mother continued to mutter, dabbing at a non-existent tear in the corner of her eye. Every time the relatives ask about you, I have to swallow my pride. I carried you for 9 months. I paid for a proper education, just for you to throw your youth away in the mud and the killing. You've always been so selfish, Sarah. You only ever think about yourself. I stood perfectly still, feeling the cold metal of my metals pressing through the fabric, touching my skin. If I were 18, maybe I would have screamed. I would have cried. I would have desperately listed my achievements, trying to make her understand how vital my work was to national security. I would have begged for her validation. But at 32, after seeing death from a few inches away, I had realized a very cruel truth. You cannot heal people who only want to use you as a bandage. Are you not going to say anything? My mother raised an eyebrow. My silence was irritating her. She needed a reaction. She needed me to hurt. I looked deep into her eyes, empty eyes, reflecting nothing but her own ego. I slowly placed my champagne flute, which I hadn't taken a single sip from, down on the marble table. The glass hit the stone with a dry, hollow clack. "Excuse me," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of a single ripple of emotion. "Congratulations, Chloe." "Richard." I turned my back and took long, steady strides toward the front door. "If you walk out that door, don't you ever expect me to welcome you back into this house again?" Her voice shrilled from behind me, the classic ultimatum. She was absolutely certain I would stop. She thought I would be terrified of being disowned by my own blood. She expected me to turn around and bow my head in apology like a broken child. But I didn't stop. When I pushed open that heavy oak door, the biting cold of the Ohio winter hit my face. The wind howled through the bare trees. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the epaulets of my uniform. I got into my Jeep, turned the key, and started the engine. As I drove out of that wealthy neighborhood, I checked my rearview mirror. The warm yellow lights of the mansion grew smaller until they were completely swallowed by the night. I didn't shed a single tear. For the first time after spending decades suffocating in that toxic love, my chest felt strangely light. Time is a magnificent liar. People say time heals all wounds. It doesn't. Time just teaches you how to carry the wound without letting it bleed on the outside. 5 years passed. In those 5 years, I never returned to Ohio. I buried myself in my work. I learned how to turn isolation into a weapon. My ability to analyze human psychology, a skill I was forced to develop to survive my mother's manipulation, became my sharpest asset in the military. At 37, I was promoted to major. I was transferred to the Financial Crimes Task Force at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. My mission was to track dirty money, decrypting terrorist financing networks hidden under the guise of multinational hedge funds, a job that required a cold head, absolute silence, and zero room for emotion. A private life. An apartment in Alexandria with the curtains always half-drawn, light gray walls, and a single snake plant in the corner. No drama. No heavy sighs of judgment. I was completely free. But if you've ever lived with a narcissist, you know this. They never truly let you go, even when you've walked away. Occasionally, late at night, my personal phone would light up. The screen would flash a familiar number. I never picked up. And then, the notification would pop up. New voicemail. Sarah, it's Mom. I had to go to the hospital yesterday for my joints. The doctor says I might need surgery. Chloe is busy vacationing in Europe with Richard. I didn't want to bother her, so I went alone. People looked at me, asking where my eldest daughter was. I didn't know where to hide my face. I guess your military job is more important than your own mother's life. I'm just calling to let you know, just in case I die on the operating table. She didn't need surgery. It was just mild arthritis flaring up from the weather. But she needed an excuse to reach into my mind, to remind me what a terrible daughter I was. Sarah, it was Chloe's birthday last week, and you didn't even send a gift. Are you really that petty? She just bought her second mansion. Richard is doing so well. The whole family is so proud. Just keep clinging to your rigid little principles. A woman really only needs a capable husband in the end. It breaks my heart thinking about you growing old all alone. The flaunting. The comparisons. That was how she measured a person's worth. Her entire universe revolved around appearances. Who wore what designer, who drove what car, who married the biggest bank account. Every time I listened to those recordings, I just sat quietly on my sofa, watching my phone screen slowly fade to black. I wasn't angry. Truly. I just felt pity. Pity for a woman who spent her entire life building a castle on the sand, fully convinced it was eternal. I never texted back. I never called back to defend myself. My silence was the most brutal punishment I could give her. Because to people who crave attention, being ignored is like having their oxygen cut off. They want you to get mad. They want you to scream and cry. Because if you react, it means they still have power over you. When you go completely silent, they become invisible. And I let her drown in that invisibility, right up until the day her sandcastle finally collapsed. October 2026, 5 years after that winter night. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a mug of black coffee, my eyes locked on the flat-screen TV on the wall. CNN's morning financial report had a glaring red banner scrolling across the bottom. Breaking news, R&C hedge fund raided BY FBI. CEO Richard Calvert, arrested N, federal money laundering ring. I slowly brought the mug to my lips and took a sip. The bitter taste coated my tongue. I didn't blink as I stared at the footage of Richard, my arrogant brother-in-law, being escorted out of a glass building on Wall Street by 2 FBI agents. His tailored suit was rumpled, his hands cuffed in front of him, his head ducked to avoid the press cameras. The field reporter's voice continued. Authorities indicate that the R&C fund utilized a network of shell contracts to launder tens of millions of dollars for South American cartels over the past 4 years. A federal freeze has been issued. All bank accounts and real estate tied to Calvert and his immediate family have been frozen indefinitely pending investigation. I reached for the remote and turned off the screen. The apartment fell back into its familiar, comforting silence. A few hours later, classified briefs landed on my desk at the Pentagon. As a counterterrorism financial investigator, I had known about this network for months, though my department was only assisting the FBI from the sidelines. I had read the entire file. I knew exactly what position my family was in. It wasn't just a financial collapse. It was a social massacre. Richard was facing at least 20 years in federal prison. Chloe, my arrogant little sister, had all her credit cards instantly declined. The mansions, the luxury cars, the Hermes bag collection, all seized. And my mother, she had liquidated her entire life savings, even the money from selling the old house my father left behind, and handed it to Richard to invest for high yields. She genuinely believed she was a financial genius. Now, her accounts were entirely frozen under suspicion of holding dirty money. They had plummeted from the peak of the elite straight into the mud of federal criminals overnight. The relatives who used to flatter her, the high society ladies who drank afternoon tea with her, they all blocked her number simultaneously. The hypocrisy of the elite is always ruthless. When you have money, they are your soulmates. When the FBI is involved, you're a plague. I knew what was going to happen next. It was like a pre-programmed mathematical equation. When a manipulator is backed into a corner and stripped of all resources, they will return to their old food source. They will come crawling back to the child they threw away. And I was ready for it. Friday afternoon, 4 days after the arrest. The intercom in my apartment buzzed. The receptionist downstairs sounded hesitant. "Major Hayes, there's an elderly woman down here. She claims to be your mother. She's crying in the lobby and demanding to see you. We were going to call security, but it's fine." I cut him off calmly. "Send her up. Room 1402. I walked over to the mirror in the hallway and adjusted the collar of my uniform. I wasn't wearing my dress blues like years ago. Just my standard Pentagon service uniform, but every crease was razor sharp. The golden oak leaf of a major sat proudly on my collar. Knock. Knock. I opened the door. The person standing in front of me was no longer the proud, aristocratic woman draped in silk and diamonds. My mother looked a decade older. Her hair was a mess. Her clothes were disheveled. Her eyes were puffy, laced with the red, bloodshot veins of pure panic. The second she saw me, the performance began. She lunged forward, dropping her purse to the floor, grabbing my arm, and breaking into hysterical sobs. A gut-wrenching, theatrical cry. "Oh, Sarah, Sarah, my sweet girl, I knew you were here. I knew you wouldn't abandon our family." She tried to bury her face in my shoulder, but I stood as rigid as a steel pillar. My muscles didn't relax. I didn't raise my arms to hug her back. I just let her cling to my arm like a drowning sailor. "Come in," I said. My voice was so cold I could feel her flinch. She walked into the living room, her eyes darting around my minimalist apartment. A flash of confusion crossed her tear-filled eyes. There was nothing here for her to compare, nothing for her to judge. "Sarah, our family is ruined." She collapsed onto the edge of the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Richard, he lied to all of us. He lied to me. My entire retirement fund has been frozen by the government. Chloe is being interrogated. They took her house. They froze everything. I don't have a single penny left to live on." I walked to the kitchen island, poured a glass of filtered water, and placed it on the glass table in front of her. "I read the news," I said simply. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. But in that brief second, through my professional training, I caught a sliver of cunning calculation deep in her eyes. "Sarah." She lunged forward, grabbing both of my hands. Her hands were ice cold and shaking. "Last week, I saw your name in a Department of Defense article. They called you Major. They said your division works directly with the FBI on financial crimes. Is that true?" I stared at her in silence, waiting for the punchline. The absolute peak of audacity. "Sarah, you have clearance, don't you?" Her voice dropped to a frantic, manic whisper. "You work for the government. You know people at the Pentagon. You just need to make a call. Lift the freeze on my accounts. Tell them our family has nothing to do with Richard's dirty money. It's just a piece of paper. Sarah, just one signature from you." She squeezed my hands, her nails digging into my skin. You have to save your sister. She can't live on the streets. She'll die. You're the older sister. You can't just stand by and watch us drown. Just consider this your way of repaying me for giving you life. Please?" The air in the room instantly turned to ice. The only sound was the rain beating against the glass. Here it was. It had finally arrived. After 32 years of being trampled on, cheapened, and treated as garbage that ruined her perfect image, here she was, begging me to use the very cheap power she once despised, just to save her own skin. I slowly pulled my hands out of her grip. The movement was unhurried, but ruthlessly decisive. I took a step back, crossed my arms over my chest, and looked down at the woman sitting on my couch. "Let me summarize your request for you." My voice echoed in the room, steady and sharp as a straight razor. "You are asking a senior intelligence officer of the Department of Defense to betray her oath to the Constitution. You are asking me to abuse federal authority, interfere in an ongoing criminal investigation, tamper with classified intelligence, and face 20 years in a federal penitentiary for treason." Her eyes widened, her breath hitched. And all of those risks. I leaned in slightly, staring directly into her dilated pupils, just to save a fraudulent criminal, to bail out an arrogant sister, and to scrape back some dirty money so you can maintain your pathetic illusion of high society? What? What are you talking about?" she stammered, her lips trembling. The victim facade was beginning to crack. "I'm speaking very clear English, Eleanor." I stood up straight. "5 years ago, in that mansion, you told me my metals were cheap, that I was rigid and useless. So tell me, why are you here today, begging a useless daughter to use her cheap power to save you?" Her face went from pale to a deep, furious red. When a manipulator realizes their tears and victimhood no longer work, they pivot to rage. It's pure instinct. She sprang up from the couch, glaring at me with absolute venom. Are you trying to get revenge on me?" she hissed, her voice shrill and deafening. "I carried you for 9 months. I gave you this life. Are you just going to watch your own mother and sister end up on the streets? You are cold-blooded. You are a heartless monster. I gave birth to a viper." She raised her hand to slap me, but before her palm could even come close to my face, my right hand shot up, locking her wrist mid-air. With the grip of a combat-trained soldier, I applied just enough pressure to make her wince in pain, but not enough to break the bone. I held her there, pulling her in slightly so my breath hit her face. "You didn't give birth to me out of love. I enunciated every single syllable. You gave birth to me to be a tool for your narcissism, and when that tool didn't obey, you threw it away. Well, that tool has been forged into a sword, and you do not get to hold the hilt." I violently shoved her hand away. She stumbled backward, crashing heavily onto the sofa, gasping for air. I walked over to the wooden console, pulled out a few tissues, and placed them gently next to the glass of water. Save your tears. Federal agents and judges aren't manipulated by crocodile tears. I picked up my phone from the table and pressed the intercom button. "Lobby security? This is room 1402. Come up and escort my guest out. And from this day forward, add this woman to the restricted access list. If she steps within a 300-foot radius of this building, call the police immediately." How dare you do this to your own mother?" she screamed, her voice shattering in absolute despair. I turned my back to her and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window. 5 years ago, you told me never to expect a welcome in your world. Today, I'm returning the favor. Get out of my house." 2 security guards knocked and entered. They were professional and polite, but firmly grabbed her arms. My mother thrashed. She screamed the most vile curses a mother could ever direct at her own child. The obscenities echoed against the walls, fading away, further and further, until the heavy elevator doors slammed shut. I stood alone in my apartment. It was so quiet I could hear the beating of my own heart. I walked over to my liquor cabinet, poured myself a glass of bourbon. The ice cubes clinked sharply against the crystal. I took a sip. The amber liquid slid down my throat, sending a warm fire blooming in my chest. I looked down at the streets of Washington, D.C. through the rain-streaked glass. Cars trailed each other under the pale yellow streetlights. The world just kept moving, completely indifferent to the fact that a family had just been destroyed or that a life had just been reborn. Richard was sentenced to 25 years without parole. Chloe had to file for bankruptcy, moved into a cheap rental on the outskirts of town, and started working as a cashier at a local grocery store. Her wealthy friends never visited her. Not once. My mother, she lost everything. She had to move into a state-subsidized nursing home. I heard she still tells the nurses there about how rich she used to be and how wicked her Pentagon officer daughter is. But no one cares. To them, she's just a bitter, delusional old woman. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They say the moment you see your enemies hit rock bottom, you'll feel vindicated. You'll laugh at their pain. But they're wrong. Revenge isn't an action movie. There's no applause, no celebratory fireworks. The moment I watched the woman who gave birth to me get dragged out the door by security, I didn't feel gloating. I didn't feel heartbreak either. The only thing I felt was emptiness. A clean, pure emptiness. That was the moment I realized I was finally free. For 32 years, I carried a massive boulder called family expectations. I constantly asked myself what I had to do to be good enough, how much blood and sweat I had to sacrifice just to buy a single look of pride from them. But today, I dropped the boulder myself. If you are listening to this story and you find yourself trapped in the suffocating web of toxic relationships disguised as family, if you are constantly being drained, made to feel small by the very people who were supposed to protect you, remember this: you do not owe anyone a shrunken version of yourself just to make them comfortable. You are not responsible for being the emotional dumping ground for people who refuse to grow up. Cutting off a toxic family member isn't cruel. It is the bravest thing you will ever do to protect your own life. Sometimes, your peace of mind is worth far more than the empty title of family. I am Major Sarah Hayes. My heart might carry scars from battlefield shrapnel. My soul might carry cuts from my own blood. But I am still standing here, steady, quiet, and completely whole.